I stood outside the bus, feeling invisible, thinking no one cared about me at all. The weather that September morning betrayed nothing of what was about to unfold. The sky stretched above Jefferson Elementary like a perfect blue canvas, unmarred by clouds. I remember adjusting my uniform, a pleated navy skirt and white blouse that my mother had ironed twice to ensure every crease was perfect. My hair was pulled back into 2 neat puffs, secured with red ribbons that matched my backpack. I was 11 years old, and this was supposed to be the field trip I'd been looking forward to for months. The Natural History Museum was hosting a special exhibit on ancient Egypt, and our history teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, had been prepping us for weeks. I'd read every book in the school library about mummies, hieroglyphics, and pharaohs. I had even made flashcards to remember the names of Egyptian gods. The anticipation of seeing real artifacts had kept me awake the night before, my mind buzzing with excitement. The school parking lot was chaotic that morning. 2 yellow buses idled noisily, exhaling puffs of diesel smoke that hung in the air. My classmates clustered in groups, their voices creating a symphony of excitement. Parents dropped off last-minute permission slips, lunchboxes, and forgotten jackets. I stood alone, clutching my meticulously packed lunch bag. Mom had woken up early to make my favorite, peanut butter and strawberry jam sandwiches cut into triangles, carrot sticks, apple slices, and 2 chocolate chip cookies she'd baked the night before. The permission slip was safely tucked into my pocket, signed by my mother 3 days prior, and double-checked by both of us last night. "Line up by homeroom, please. Check in with your teacher before boarding," Principal Walters called through, his megaphone, his voice slicing through the morning commotion. I joined the line for Mrs. Brown's 6th grade class. Kids jostled forward, eager to claim the coveted back seats of the bus. I wasn't picky about where I sat. I just wanted to get going. When I reached the front of the line, I smiled up at Mrs. Brown, who was checking names off a clipboard. "Permission slip, Zora?" she asked without looking up. I proudly pulled the slightly crumpled paper from my pocket and handed it over. She glanced at it, then frowned. My heart skipped. "This isn't complete," she said, her voice flat. "What do you mean?" I asked, confusion creeping into my voice. "My mom signed it right here." I pointed to my mother's familiar signature at the bottom of the page. Mrs. Brown sighed, the kind of sigh adults use when they think children are being difficult on purpose. "The emergency contact information isn't filled out, and there's no check mark for the photography consent." Her finger tapped the empty spaces on the form. "I specifically mentioned this in class 3 times, Zora." Heat rose to my cheeks. But my mom filled everything out. I watched her do it. Mrs. Brown's lips tightened into a thin line. I had seen this expression before. It was the face she made when she thought someone was lying. "This is the form you gave me, and it's incomplete." She handed it back. "I'm sorry, but you know the rules. No complete permission slip, no field trip." I felt as if the ground beneath me was crumbling. "But next," she called, looking past me to Tommy Richards, who bounded forward with his permission slip extended like a winning lottery ticket. I stepped aside, my mind racing. This had to be a mistake. My mother was meticulous about these things. She worked as an administrative assistant at a law firm. Paperwork was her specialty. "Mrs. Brown, please." I tried again, my voice smaller than I intended. "Could you check again? Maybe there was another page, or—" "Zora." Her voice had an edge now. "I don't have time for this. The buses need to leave on schedule. You'll have to join Mrs. Wilson's class for the day." Mrs. Wilson taught 2nd grade. I would be spending the day with children 4 years younger than me, doing addition and subtraction, while my classmates explored ancient Egyptian treasures. But that's my final word on the matter. Mrs. Brown turned away, effectively dismissing me. I watched, frozen in place, as my classmates filed onto the bus. Some glanced at me curiously, but most were too excited about the trip to notice my absence. Jasmine, who sat next to me in class, caught my eye and mouthed, "What happened?" I just shook my head, unable to explain, unwilling to cry in front of everyone. The bus doors closed with a hiss that sounded final and damning. Through the windows, I could see kids already claiming seats, laughing, trading snacks. The buses pulled away, leaving me standing alone in a parking lot that suddenly felt vast and empty. Principal Walters approached, his megaphone now hanging at his side. "Zora, Mrs. Brown tells me you'll be joining Mrs. Wilson today." I nodded mutely, afraid that speaking would unleash the tears burning behind my eyes. "These things happen," he said, not unkindly. "There will be other field trips, but not this one, not the one I had been dreaming about for months." As I trudged toward the school building, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if Mrs. Brown had deliberately left me behind? She had never seemed to like me much. I raised my hand too often. In class, I asked questions she sometimes couldn't answer. Once I had politely corrected her about the date of the Emancipation Proclamation, and the look she gave me could have frozen lava. No, I told myself. Adults didn't do things like that. They didn't hold petty grudges against children. Did they? Mrs. Wilson's classroom felt like stepping back in time. The desks were smaller, the alphabet lined the walls, and the books on the shelves had more pictures than words. The second graders stared at me as if I were an exotic specimen in a zoo. "Class, this is Zora from 6th grade. She'll be joining us today," Mrs. Wilson announced cheerfully. "Zora, we're working on our spelling words this morning. You can help. The children practice if you'd like." I nodded, grateful for something to do, even if it was helping 7-year-olds spell because and friend. The morning dragged. I checked the clock every 5 minutes, imagining what my class was doing at the museum. By now, they would be looking at the mummy exhibit. Later, they would eat lunch in the museum's garden courtyard, then visit the planetarium in the afternoon. At lunchtime, I sat alone at the edge of a table in the cafeteria, picking at my sandwiches. They no longer seemed special. They were just reminders of what I was missing. The school secretary found me there. "Zora, your mother is on the phone. She'd like to speak with you." I followed her to the office, wondering if my mother somehow knew about the permission slip disaster. "Hello," I said into the receiver. "Zora? Baby, what's going on? Mrs. Brown just called me asking why you weren't in school today." My throat tightened. "I am at school. I couldn't go on the trip because she said my permission slip wasn't filled out completely." There was a pause, then my mother's voice, low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of anger that I recognized. "That's impossible. I filled out every line of that form. I even made a copy of it because it was the last one, and I wanted to make sure we had everything right." Relief washed over me. I wasn't crazy. She said the emergency contact part was empty, and there was no check for the photo thing. "I completed all of that." My mother's voice was tight now. "And I have the copy to prove it. I'm coming to the school right now." "But Mom, you can't leave work." "Watch me," she replied, and I could hear her gathering her things. "Sit tight, baby. I'll be there soon." I returned to Mrs. Wilson's class, but now a glimmer of hope had replaced my despair. My mother was coming. She would fix this. An hour later, I was called to the principal's office. My mother sat in one of the chairs facing Principal Walters's desk, her back straight, her expression composed but resolute. I had seen this posture before. It was the stance she took when she was prepared to fight for something. "Zora, come in," Principal Walters said, his voice gentler than usual. My mother extended her arm and I went to her side. She gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "We've been discussing your permission slip situation," Principal Walters continued. "Your mother has shown me her copy of the form, which is indeed complete." Mrs. Brown sat in another chair, her face tight. She didn't look at me. "It appears there may have been some confusion with the paperwork," Principal Walters said carefully. "Confusion is one word for it," my mother replied evenly. "Discrimination might be another." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Principal Walters cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hughes, I assure you—" "Let's be clear," my mother interrupted. "My daughter, one of only 3 black children, in her grade, is mysteriously the only student prevented from attending this field trip, despite having proper documentation that I can prove was submitted correctly." Mrs. Brown finally spoke. "I did not receive a completed form from Zora. Perhaps it was lost, or perhaps you chose not to see it," my mother countered. "This isn't the first issue we've had, is it, Mrs. Brown? There was the group project where Zora did most of the work but received the lowest grade. The time she raised her hand for 20 minutes while you called on everyone else. The misplaced homework that mysteriously reappeared after I emailed you." Mrs. Brown's face flushed. "I treat all my students equally. I would never. The evidence suggests otherwise," my mother said, calmly. She turned to Principal Walters. "I want this incident documented, and I want assurance that steps will be taken to address what appears to be a pattern of behavior." Principal Walters looked uncomfortable but nodded. "We take these concerns very seriously, Mrs. Hughes. I'll conduct a thorough investigation." My mother stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Zora will not be returning to class today, and I'll be expecting that investigation to include interviews with other parents of color about their experiences with Mrs. Brown." As we walked out, I couldn't help but glance back at Mrs. Brown. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. In the car, my mother was quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, "I'm sorry you missed your trip, baby." "It's okay," I replied automatically, though it wasn't. "No, it's not okay. None of this is okay." She gripped the steering wheel tightly. "But we're not going to let this pass without a response." "What are you going to do?" I asked, both anxious and curious. A small, determined smile played at the corners of my mother's mouth. "I'm going to make a few calls, starting with your Uncle Marcus." Uncle Marcus wasn't really my uncle, but my mother's closest friend from college. He had been at every birthday party, every Christmas dinner, every important moment of my life. He was also one of the most successful black architects in the state, known for his innovative designs and his philanthropic work. "What can Uncle Marcus do?" I asked. My mother's smile widened. "You'd be surprised." The next morning, I reluctantly returned to school. Word had spread about my missing the field trip, and several classmates asked me what happened. I gave vague answers, not wanting to relive the humiliation. Mrs. Brown avoided looking at me directly, calling on me only when absolutely necessary. The tension in the classroom was palpable, like static electricity before a storm. At lunch, Jasmine slid onto the bench beside me. "The museum was cool," she said, "but the mummy room was closed for renovation. Everyone was super disappointed." I tried not to feel pleased about this unfortunate development. "That's too bad," I said, taking a bite of my sandwich. "Yeah, and Tommy got sick on the bus ride back, threw up all over Melissa's new shoes." Jasmine giggled. "Maybe you didn't miss much after all." I managed a small smile. It didn't make up for what happened, but it was something. After lunch, we were in the middle of a math lesson when a strange sound interrupted Mrs. Brown's explanation of long division. A rhythmic thumping, growing louder by the second. Mrs. Brown frowned. "What on earth?" Several students rushed to the windows. "It's a helicopter!" Tommy shouted. "There's a helicopter landing on the field." The class erupted in excitement. Even Mrs. Brown seemed momentarily stunned out of her usual composure. Principal Walters' voice came over the intercom. "Attention all students and staff. Please remain in your classrooms. I repeat, please remain in your classrooms." But the commotion was too great. Students pressed against the windows, craning, their necks to see. Mrs. Brown half-heartedly attempted to restore order. "Zora Hughes," the intercom crackled again. "Please report to the main office immediately. Bring your belongings." Every head turned to stare at me. Heat crept up my neck as I gathered my books and backpack. "Go on," Mrs. Brown said tersely, avoiding my eyes. I walked through silent hallways that seemed to vibrate with the helicopter's presence. When I reached the office, Principal Walters was standing with my mother and Uncle Marcus. Uncle Marcus looked imposing in his tailored suit, his dreadlocks neatly pulled back. He broke into a wide grin when he saw me. "There's my favorite niece," he boomed, opening his arms for a hug. "What's going on?" I asked, bewildered. My mother's eyes danced with mischief and triumph. "We're taking you on a field trip." "In a helicopter?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Uncle Marcus nodded. "The Natural History Museum in the city is hosting an exclusive preview of their new Egyptian artifacts tonight. The curator is a friend of mine. I designed the new wing of the museum. When your mom told me what happened, I made some calls." Principal Walters looked both impressed and slightly terrified. "This is quite unprecedented. Extraordinary circumstances call for extraordinary measures," my mother replied smoothly. We walked outside, where the helicopter sat on the soccer field, its blades slowly rotating. A small crowd of students and teachers had gathered at the building's edge, watching in amazement. I spotted Mrs. Brown among them, her face a mixture of shock and something else. Regret, perhaps? Our eyes met briefly before she looked away. Uncle Marcus helped me into the helicopter, handing me noise-canceling headphones. As we lifted off, I pressed my face to the window, watching my school grow smaller, the people reduced to tiny dots. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see my mother handing me something. A new backpack embroidered with hieroglyphics. "Open it," she mouthed over the noise. Inside was a book on Egyptian mythology, a disposable camera, and a small jewelry box containing a scarab beetle pendant on a gold chain. "For protection," Uncle Marcus said into his microphone, his voice coming through my headphones. "The ancient Egyptians believed scarab beetles brought good luck and kept away evil." I clutched the pendant, overwhelmed with emotion. The helicopter banked slightly, giving me a view of the city sprawled below, the buildings like toys, the cars like ants marching along predetermined paths. In that moment, floating above everything that had hurt and humiliated me, I felt something shift inside. The world had tried to make me small, to leave me behind, but here I was, soaring. The museum curator met us personally, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Miss Hughes," she greeted me formally, extending her Hand. I'm Dr. Patel. It's an honor to show you our collection today. For the next 3 hours, I received a private tour of the Egyptian exhibit. I saw artifacts that weren't even on display to the public yet. A newly discovered papyrus scroll, jewelry from a queen's tomb, a scribe's tools preserved for 3,000 years. Dr. Patel answered every question I had, no matter how detailed or obscure. She seemed genuinely impressed by my knowledge. "You know," she said at one point, "we have an internship program for high school students interested in archaeology. Keep up this passion, and I'd love to see your application in a few years." By the time we left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the museum steps. I clutched a bag of souvenirs from the gift shop and wore my scarab pendant proudly around my neck. "Thank you," I said to my mother and Uncle Marcus as we walked toward his car. We would return home by more conventional means. "This was the best field trip ever." My mother squeezed my hand. "Never let anyone make you feel small, Zora. When people try to diminish you, stand taller." The next day at school was surreal. Everyone wanted to know about the helicopter, the museum, where I'd gone with my rich uncle. I answered their questions patiently, enjoying the attention but trying not to gloat. Mrs. Brown avoided me entirely, handing out assignments without meeting my eyes. A week later, she was suddenly on leave, and we had a substitute teacher for the rest of the semester. I learned later that my mother's complaint had triggered a review of Mrs. Brown's grading patterns, which revealed significant discrepancies in how she evaluated work from students of different backgrounds. She would eventually return to teaching, but at a different school, after completing a mandatory training program on unconscious bias. The helicopter incident became school legend, growing more elaborate with each retelling. By the time I graduated from elementary school, younger kids believed that I had been whisked away to Egypt itself, returning with ancient treasures and magical powers. In reality, what I gained was something more valuable, the knowledge that injustice could be confronted, that I was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the best revenge is rising above it all, literally and figuratively. 20 years passed. The helicopter incident faded into a cherished family story, pulled out at gatherings to much laughter and embellishment. I followed my passion for history, graduating with honors from Howard University, before pursuing a doctorate in anthropology with a focus on Egyptian studies. Life has a way of coming full circle in the most unexpected ways. Last month, I was giving a lecture at the same Natural History Museum where Uncle Marcus had taken me for that private tour. I'm now Dr. Zora Hughes, guest curator for their new exhibit on women in ancient Egypt. The lecture hall was packed, faces blurring together under the bright lights. I spoke about Queen Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, and the anonymous women whose labor and art shaped a civilization. My hand occasionally drifted to my neck, where the scarab beetle pendant still hung after all these years, a reminder of protection, resilience, and flight. After the talk, as attendees lined up to have their books signed, I noticed an older woman hovering at the edge of the crowd. Her hair was now completely gray, her posture slightly stooped, but I recognized her immediately. Mrs. Brown looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were unmistakable. When the line finally dwindled, she approached the table hesitantly. "Dr. Hughes," she said, her voice thinner than I recalled. "I don't know if you remember me." "Mrs. Brown," I replied evenly. "Of course I remember you." She clutched her purse, knuckles white with tension. "I've followed your career from afar. Your work on female scribes in the Old Kingdom was illuminating." "Thank you," I said, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I came to apologize," she continued. the words rushing out as if she'd rehearsed them, but feared losing her nerve. What I did to you was unforgivable. I've spent years reflecting on my behavior, how I let my own insecurities and prejudices affect how I treated certain students, especially you. I studied her face, searching for insincerity but finding only genuine remorse. That incident, and others like it, cost me my career eventually, she said. And it should have. I had no business teaching children while carrying those biases. I took a deep breath. I appreciate your apology, Mrs. Brown. Truly. But why now, after all these years? She smiled sadly. I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's last year. I'm still in the early stages, but I'm trying to make amends while I still remember what I need to apologize for. Something softened in me. The 11-year-old who had been left behind might have wanted to see Mrs. Brown suffer, but the woman I'd become understood the complexity of human failing, the possibility of growth, the importance of reconciliation. I have a favor to ask, Mrs. Brown said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a worn, yellowed piece of paper. This is your original permission slip, the complete one. I kept it all these years as a reminder of my shame. I took the paper carefully, staring at my mother's familiar handwriting, the checked boxes, the completed emergency contact information, evidence of a small injustice that had shaped my life in unexpected ways. Would you sign my copy of your book? She asked. Not for forgiveness, but as acknowledgement that something good, eventually, came from something terrible. I signed her book, writing a brief note inside. To Mrs. Brown, sometimes the most important journeys begin when we're left behind. Thank you for teaching me to soar. Dr. Zora Hughes. As she turned to leave, I noticed her hand trembling as she put the book in her bag. Mrs. Brown, I called. Wait. She paused, looking back expectantly. We're having a reception at the museum next week for educators interested in our new outreach program for underrepresented students. We provide museum passes, educational materials, even transportation for field trips to ensure no child gets left behind. Would you like to come? Your experience, both your mistakes and your growth, might be valuable to share. Tears welled in her eyes. You would want me there? After everything, I thought of the helicopter rising, of the world growing small beneath me, of the perspective that only distance can provide. The past doesn't change, I said, but how we carry it forward does. She nodded, accepting the invitation card I extended. As I watched her walk away, I felt the weight of an old hurt finally lift completely. That night, I called my mother to tell her about the encounter. She laughed in disbelief. Life is full of the strangest full circles, she said. Your uncle, Marcus, would have appreciated the poetry of it. Uncle Marcus had passed away 5 years ago, but his legacy lived on in the museum wing he designed, in the scholarship fund he established for Black students pursuing careers in architecture and archaeology, and in the woman I had become, someone who knew how to rise above, how to soar when others tried to clip my wings. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone tried to make you feel small, only for it to become the catalyst for something greater? I'd love to hear your stories. How would you have handled being left behind? And what would you do if you encountered that person years later? Share this with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes our greatest triumphs are born from our deepest disappointments. Life has taught me that the view from above, whether from a helicopter or the vantage point of years past, always reveals a bigger picture than we can see when we're standing alone in an empty parking lot, watching opportunities pull away, without us. Sometimes being left behind is just the beginning of an extraordinary journey.